Michelle Bloodworth is the president and CEO of America's Power. So Michelle, I'll turn things over to you, and also thank you very much for joining us and being here with us this afternoon.
Well, first of all, I certainly want to thank Sheila and Andrew, all of you on USEA's entire team. I have really enjoyed the discussion today and to hear from so many leaders in the energy industry. America's Power is the only national trade association who solely focuses on coal, electricity, and our members consist of companies across the entire coal supply chain. Coal producers, generators, transportation companies, and equipment manufacturers. As we've heard throughout this meeting so far, these are incredibly interesting and important times for all of us to work in the field of energy and energy policy. Anyone paying attention understands that the American electric grid is in the midst of an energy transition, a sea change in the way that we produce and consume power. The grid continues to diversify, certainly as we've heard today, as more renewables come online. In fact, according to EIA, subsidies, state mandates, and other policies are accelerating renewable growth to the point where renewable generation is on pace to double its market share by 2050. If this holds true, this will mark an incredible shift in power production and pose a number of significant challenges to ensuring the reliability for our grid. At the same time, advances in electric vehicles and changes in how we get and use energy on a daily basis create a number of new questions for those managing power systems. For example, how will new technologies like EVs and their power affect the grid? How might hundreds of thousands of new EVs on the road help or create challenges for the grid? Will they change how and where we will build generation to support charging these vehicles? Added to this growth in renewables and robust adoption of EVs is EIA's forecast that says Americans' need for additional electricity sources will only grow. That's partly because of the way the pandemic has caused economic disruptions and altered the way Americans work and play. This change in our lives creates additional new questions that need to be addressed. For example, as we automate more and more of the technologies we rely on all the time, how will the change in the demand throughout the day impact the choices grid operators need to make in ensuring our grid remains reliable? We all know that whatever energy transition we seek, whatever we want in an energy future, we also have to deal with reality. A cursory glance at headlines reveals a certain truth about America's electricity grid at the moment. Despite decades of investment and the brilliance of American ingenuity and design, our electric grid hangs in a fragile balance that requires not just close monitoring and care, but thoughtful and good energy policy. We've recently seen energy price spikes, grid emergencies in some states, electricity rationing, and voluntary curtailments in others. These are outcomes we don't expect from the world's strongest energy grid, but they are outcomes that can arise in the face of extreme weather and in conditions where policymakers have taken for granted the incredible value that traditional energy sources, including coal, play in powering America's homes and businesses. That's the reality of where we are. And I'd like to talk a moment about where we're going and the consequences of competing visions for the future. As renewables become more readily accessible, some stakeholders from state and local governments to outside advocacy organizations have become increasingly eager to speed up the move away from traditional sources such as natural gas and coal. The administration, for example, has set a goal of creating a carbon-free power sector by 2035 and making a net emissions economy no later than 2050. That is one vision for America's energy future, but it's not the only one. Rational public discourse surrounding the energy sector has long centered on an all-of-the-above approach that values a diverse blend of fuel sources, each with its distinct advantages and disadvantages. At America's Power, we strongly believe in this approach. We believe that this approach is not a controversial one, nor should it be polarizing. Considering the recent world examples, since California's rolling blackouts of August 2020, nearby states around California have retired over 4,400 megawatts of dispatchable fossil fuel capacity. This past summer, California had to lean on natural gas to prevent similar rolling blackouts from happening. And while California political leaders talked about abandoning fossil fuels for other power sources, fossil fuels like natural gas were what prevented their constituents from being in the dark and losing their air conditioning during hot summer months. When severe winter weather struck much of the central United States in February of 2021, it was coal that played an outsized role in keeping the lights on. Doing so took the collective work of the entire coal supply chain, including coal miners, railroad workers, barge operators, power plant operators, who all worked tirelessly to ensure that coal was delivered and it was there when it was needed most. Coal-fueled power plants increased their capacity to supply almost half of the electricity in the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator and the Southwest Power Pool regions during this extreme winter weather event. In MISO, which has the nation's largest coal fleet and serves many of the areas in mid-America that were affected by these significant winter storms, the coal fleet operated at an 84% capacity factor during the week of February the 15th through the 18th. That's almost double the average capacity factor that coal operated in 2020. Coal stepped up big time when it was needed. The experiences with these grid emergencies over the past 2 years and the challenges of integrating some of these intermittent resources have actually led grid operators in MISO and PJM to examine the impact of increased renewable penetration on reliability. We've been an active participant in these studies and with other stakeholders and support the work the ISOs are doing in this area. What they're finding is because renewable generation is intermittent, it doesn't always have the same reliability value as conventional generation. Further, because it's intermittent, it's going to need some level of conventional generation unless other advanced technology becomes commercially viable, which will likely not be on a wide-scale basis before 2050. In PJM's recent study that they released in December of 2021, they found that to achieve 50% renewable generation on their grid, PJM would have to add 120 gigawatts of renewable generating capacity, and they currently only have 3.3 gigawatts. They still would have to retain or replace 85% of their conventional generation, which would be gas, coal, and nuclear, in order to maintain a 1 day in 10 or a loss of load expectation. They also show that 13% of the energy in PJM in 2050 would still need to come from coal. We have commended MISO for their renewable integration report released last year, which also looked at how the risk and the challenges and the time frame and the cost to integrate massive amounts of renewables, and also the amount of time it would also take, looking at the amount of transmission that would also have to be added. And they've estimated $500 billion alone in their region for generation and transmission. These events, whether in summer weather in California or winter weather in Texas, they're not hypothetical thought exercises. They are real life. Millions of Americans were affected by them. These events show in no uncertain terms that fossil fuels still have a place in our electric grid, and they still should provide a strong cautionary tale against being too quick to toss them aside. Americans still need the coal in the entire coal supply chain for the foreseeable future, and we need to ensure that that supply chain remains healthy. That's why for the past 4 years, we've encouraged FERC and NERC to define resilience, establish criteria, and to set standards from analysis to ensure that with the growth of renewable, our grid continues to be resilient. We commend NERC for their recent announcement for a proposed and enhanced standard to take into account the realities of intermittent renewables and also just-in-time natural gas. We think more needs to be done. We think markets should be sent in PJM, in MISO, in SPP, to the coal supply chain to value the attributes and send the signal that those attributes are valued and they are needed. These signals and action to define resilience and set standards are important when you consider at the moment fossil fuels still account for 60% of the nation's generation sources. Yet a number of voices, including many in this administration, believe that we need to replace well more than half of the U.S. power supply in the next 13 years. We think that that is unrealistic. Just considering the obstacles trying to force such a dramatic shift in such a short time frame, or as I like to call it, going too far too quickly. First, the cost is staggering. Several groups have begun to outline the enormous cost of these decarbonization goals, including EPRI, which estimates in upwards of $2 trillion. These costs are driven by both the need to build 1 million megawatts of new renewable capacity that would be required, along with the new transmission necessary to connect these resources. We shouldn't gloss over the estimate that achieving these decarbonization goals will not only require an additional 1 million megawatts of wind and solar, but we've also got to ensure that the balancing resources continue to be there when they're needed. For perspective, the entire U.S. electric system today, coal, gas, nuclear, and renewables, is only slightly larger than 1 million megawatts. Even if we were somehow able to afford and build such capacity within that timeline, transmission alone would be an incredible hurdle. It's estimated that current transmission capacity would have to be increased by 60 to 100% to integrate the necessary amount of renewables. Building transmission for aggressive decarbonization goals does take significant time. It's also going to take time to develop and deploy advanced technologies like CCUS, hydrogen, advanced nuclear. It's also going to take time to transition local economies to mitigate jobs losses as we make this energy shift. But beyond those factors, something that's also important is the global context. Even with new mandates or adding additional expensive subsidies for renewables, America's grid will be 50% carbon-free by 2030. We don't need an ambitious and unrealistic plan to make real progress. We're already doing that. Over the past 50 years, traditional air pollutants have been reduced by over 90%. These reductions are due in large part to an investment by the owners of the nation's coal fleet of nearly $100 billion in the last 20 years, and more is yet to come. For example, the carbon capture facility under development at Prairie State Energy Campus in Illinois represents a significant leap forward. Efforts such as the one underway by Consol Energy offer a vision of the future that allows us to use coal while achieving net zero or even net negative coal generation through capture technologies. Likewise, beyond what's happening in the coal sector, the U.S. electricity sector has already reduced carbon emissions by 33% since 2005. In fact, eliminating the entire U.S. coal fleet tomorrow, with the resulting increases such a decision would cause, would be more than offset by just the increase in coal capacity currently under construction in China. We, like everyone else, want a strong energy future, one where homes and businesses can count on power when they need it. We also want to beat climate change, leaning on technology, ingenuity, and smarter thinking. We all want those things, but we continue to live in a world with harsh realities and significant limitations. We are reminded that at times, whether it's a sweltering summer in California or a frigid day in Texas, and if we're paying attention, we should all be reminded that coal still has an important role to play. It's true that the electricity grid is undergoing a transition, but we believe the coal fleet will be needed for the foreseeable future. We need coal-fired power because it does promote grid reliability and resilience, and it's an indispensable alternative when other electricity sources are too expensive or they're not available. We believe policymakers should work to incentivize investment and innovation as a means of reducing emissions. Rather than working to eliminate fossil fuels from the mix, reducing the nation's generating capacity in the process, they should work hand in hand with the fossil fuel industry, including the coal sector, to make fossil fuels even more environmentally sustainable. Whatever we do, the shift must be gradual enough that we lower carbon emissions without sacrificing reliability and affordability. A gradual transition will allow time to develop and deploy enabling transformation technologies, especially carbon capture and storage. And like Senator Manchin has been known to remark, we should be supporting innovation, not elimination. Hopefully, more policymakers will recognize the critical role the coal fleet plays and its supply chain can play in helping to decarbonize the electricity sector, while also helping to ensure a reliable, resilient, and affordable grid. And in doing so, they will see that our nation's coal fleet very much still has a place to play in America's electric grid. It's certainly proven that in the recent months, and with the right signals and steps, we think it can continue proving that tomorrow and for the foreseeable future. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I really appreciate your remarks, and thank you for joining us. If you have time, I do have a couple of questions I'd love to ask.
Sure.
Great, great. So, I think interestingly, coal actually had an increase in the generating mix last year for the first time in several years. What do you see for, do you see that as a sign for things ahead, or what's your outlook moving forward?
Obviously, because of the extreme weather, and we saw higher than expected for a lot of global reasons too, higher natural gas prices, we saw an increase in coal generation. However, as we continue, if we continue to not have the market signals to be sent for the critical infrastructure of the remaining coal fleet that remains, we will continue to see a decline in coal generation, and certainly as there is tremendous growth in renewable generation, we could also see declines in the generation of coal. Our position has been, we just do not believe that premature coal retirements are best for the country and also for reliable and affordable electricity.
That's a great point. Thank you. And finally, just you mentioned briefly a couple of projects at Ferris State and a console project, but could you talk about what the industry is doing to advance CCUS projects and how important those are to ensuring reliability while also achieving a goal of decarbonization?
Yeah, we continue to work both from a federal and a state policy standpoint, really advocating and educating policymakers on the need for sustained investment. So if the same amount of billions of dollars that have been given to the renewable industry, to battery storage, also to advanced nuclear, if those same incentives are given to trying to obviously allow the coal fleet to advance technology in CCUS, all these technologies are expensive and they need a lot more research and development. And so we're working both from a state and a federal standpoint to try to advocate and lobby for policies that would allow that to happen. I do have 3 members, 2 of those I just mentioned, who were awarded commercial feed studies from the Department of Energy, and they are working within their own states as well to try to develop and also receive funding to continue with those projects.
Oh, great. Yeah, and I think you can also look at the potential impacts on CCUS outside of just the power generation industry, and these can be foundational projects to advance the technology. So, Michelle, I'll stop there, but I just want to say again, thank you very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you here, and always great to have America's Power speaking at USEA events. So thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity.